Case 1. Julissa Thaler, the murder of Eli Hart. On the morning of May 20, 2022, police in Orono, Minnesota, pulled over a battered sedan with a shattered rear window and a flat tire. Behind the wheel sat 28-year-old Julissa Thaler, looking disheveled, distracted, and strangely unconcerned. Officers immediately sensed something was off. The car's interior was strewn with debris, fast food wrappers, a shovel, a saw, and an overpowering stench permeated the air. They asked Julissa if she needed help. She casually brushed them off, insisting everything was fine, but within minutes officers made a discovery that would shock Minnesota and the entire country. In the trunk, concealed under blankets and trash, lay the lifeless body of her 6-year-old son, Eli Hart. The details that emerged were as chilling as they were heartbreaking. Eli Hart was a bright, cheerful first grader, 6 years old, with a gap-toothed smile, who loved buses, fishing trips, and telling stories. In his small community of Mound, he was known for his kindness and curiosity. But behind the scenes, Eli had been caught in the middle of a bitter custody battle. His father, Tory Hart, had fought desperately to protect him, warning the courts and social workers that Julissa was unstable and dangerous. Julissa Thaler had a history of mental health struggles, drug use, and run-ins with the law, red flags that many believed made her unfit to care for Eli. Yet despite these warnings, and after a lengthy custody dispute, Julissa was awarded full custody of Eli just weeks before his death. It was a decision that would prove tragic. What happened on that May morning was nothing short of horrific and calculated. Evidence later revealed that Julissa had purchased a shotgun and ammunition just days earlier. On May 20th, she picked up Eli for what was supposed to be a routine visit. Instead, she drove him around aimlessly for hours. At some point, Julissa pulled over and opened fire, shooting her little boy up to 9 times as he sat strapped into his booster seat. The autopsy confirmed multiple shotgun wounds. Even more disturbing, investigators believe Eli may have remained in the car, critically injured or already dead, for hours after the shooting, while Julissa attempted to cover her tracks. Her behavior after the murder was almost surreal in its brazenness. Julissa disposed of the murder weapon in a public trash bin and continued driving around in the bullet-riddled car, the back window blown out, as if nothing was wrong. When police finally stopped her, alerted by a caller who noticed her car's smashed window and flat tire, she lied calmly. She claimed she had just dropped Eli off at a friend's house, but the evidence in the trunk told a different story. Eli's blood was everywhere, and there was no hiding what she had done. The moment officers lifted the trunk and found Eli's small body, remains forever etched in their memories. One of them later described it as the most heartbreaking scene of his career. In that instant, Tory Hart's worst nightmare had come true. The system had failed, and his beloved son was gone. When Julissa Thaler was arrested, she showed a chilling lack of remorse. At her trial, prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence: ballistic tests matching the shotgun to the shells in the car, surveillance footage showing Julissa driving with a shattered window, and testimony from friends and family about her erratic, paranoid behavior in the days before Eli's death. Social workers and relatives recounted how they had raised red flags for months, warning that Julissa's mental state was deteriorating. Julissa's own internet searches were telling. Inquiries about gun calibers and custody laws, painting the picture of a woman preparing for a dreadful act. The defense had little to cling to. They suggested Julissa was mentally ill, that she might not have been fully responsible for her actions. But the jury saw through it. The evidence of premeditation, buying a weapon, luring Eli into the car, driving to a secluded spot, and the sheer brutality of the crime left no doubt. After a swift deliberation, the jury convicted her of first-degree murder. During the sentencing in February 2023, the courtroom was thick with grief and anger. Eli's family filled the benches, many wearing blue, Eli's favorite color, in his memory. His father, Tory, gave an emotional impact statement describing the son he lost, calling Eli "my best friend" and telling the court that losing him destroyed his world. A framed photo of Eli in his school picture sat at the front of the court, a heartbreaking reminder of the boy who should have been starting second grade. Prosecutors asked for the maximum penalty under Minnesota law, and the judge agreed. Julissa Thaler was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But what made headlines even more than the sentence was Julissa's own outburst in court. Given one last opportunity to speak, she stood shackled in her prison jumpsuit and declared, "I'm innocent. You all. You're garbage." Her vulgar, defiant rant stunned the courtroom into silence and was caught on video, quickly spreading across the internet. It was a final glimpse into the cold, narcissistic mindset of a woman who, even when faced with overwhelming evidence and her own child's death, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Today, Julissa Thaler sits in a Minnesota prison cell, destined to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Meanwhile, those who loved Eli have struggled to pick up the pieces. Eli's family and the community have rallied to remember the little boy's short life. His father, Eli Hart, channeled his grief into action. He filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the county social services and employees who had returned Eli to Julissa's custody, determined to hold them accountable for ignoring the warnings. Locals in Mound, Minnesota began fundraising to build a playground in Eli's honor, ensuring that his joyful spirit lives on in a place where other children can laugh and play. For many, what makes this case so horrifying isn't just the monstrous act itself, but the knowledge that it could have been prevented. A father's pleas were dismissed, red flags were waved away, and a little boy slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect him. Julissa Thaler will never walk free again, and that brings some measure of justice. But for Eli's family, it's a hollow comfort compared to the loss of a child who deserved so much more. They are left with memories of a smiling 6-year-old and a mission to reform the system so that no other family endures such a nightmare. Eli Hart's name now lives on as a tragic reminder and a call to action. In the end, this story is about more than one evil mother. It's about a failure to listen and intervene before it was too late. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe to Crime Unknown. In our next episode, we explore another case that will leave you stunned. Case 2. Klara Matthews, the fake kidnapping of Shannon. On the afternoon of February 19, 2008, 9-year-old Shannon Matthews disappeared on her short walk home from school in the quiet town of Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, UK. She should have been home by 4 p.m. The route was barely half a mile. But Shannon never arrived. By early evening, panic set in. Her mother, 32-year-old Klara Matthews, raised the alarm. Police were notified, neighbors started knocking on doors, and within hours, the community was mobilized. A missing child in this tight-knit English town instantly became front-page news. At the center of the frantic search was Klara Matthews herself. In the days that followed, she appeared on television constantly, looking distraught and pleading for her daughter's safe return. "Shannon, we all love you, please come home," she begged in front of the cameras, often clutching Shannon's favorite teddy bear for dramatic effect. Karen sobbed and begged, saying she couldn't bear another night without her little girl. These tearful appeals were replayed across the country, fueling an outpouring of sympathy for the Matthews family. To most observers, it seemed like another heartbreaking case of a child snatched by a stranger. The search effort was enormous. West Yorkshire Police launched one of the largest manhunts in UK history, with more than 300 officers involved, the biggest deployment since the infamous Yorkshire Ripper case decades earlier. Hundreds of local volunteers scoured parks, woods and alleyways. Police used sniffer dogs, helicopters with heat sensors, and door-to-door inquiries. Over 1,000 homes were searched. The entire nation held its breath, recalling the unsolved disappearance of Madeleine McCann the year before. No one wanted another child to vanish without answers. But as days stretched into weeks with no sign of Shannon, detectives began noticing that something about Karen's behavior was off. In press conferences, Karen sometimes seemed oddly detached. She would repeat rehearsed lines, almost word for word the same phrases in each interview, as if reading a script. When journalists asked probing questions, Karen would avoid eye contact or deflect the question entirely. Observers noted that she never truly cried. Her eyes stayed dry even as she made sobbing sounds. Occasionally, she even flashed a quick smile or joke when she thought the cameras were off. Suspicion quietly began to take root among the investigators. Behind closed doors, police also noted that Karen showed very little urgency or genuine emotion when they discussed leads. In one instance, officers informed her of a possible sighting of Shannon, news that would make any loving mother's heart leap. Karen's reaction was strangely subdued. She just shrugged and said, "All right." Off camera, she often seemed more interested in updates about the reward money, which had ballooned to $50,000, than in new tips about Shannon's whereabouts. While the community rallied day and night, organizing search parties and prayer vigils, Karen's odd demeanor planted seeds of doubt among the officers working the case. Then, on March 14, 2008, 24 days after Shannon vanished, the investigation cracked wide open. Following a tip, police raided the small flat of Michael Donovan, a 39-year-old man who happened to be Karen's current boyfriend's uncle. Donovan lived about a mile from Shannon's home, unremarkable and previously not on the radar. What officers found there made their blood boil. Hiding in the base of a divan bed in a dark, enclosed space was little Shannon Matthews, alive. The 9-year-old was weak, terrified, and had been drugged into near unconsciousness. She had a strap tied around her to restrain her. It was a scene of twisted cruelty, but also immense relief. Shannon was found. The initial joy of finding Shannon safe quickly gave way to anger and disbelief as the truth emerged. This was not a random kidnapping by a stranger. It was an elaborate hoax orchestrated by her own mother. Investigators soon uncovered that Klara Matthews and Michael Donovan had planned the entire abduction from the start. Their motive, money, specifically the $50,000 reward offered by a local newspaper and donations from the public. The scheme was as simple as it was sickening. Donovan would hide Shannon in his flat, keeping her sedated and captive. Meanwhile, Karen would play the part of the distraught mother, milking the media attention and public sympathy. After a few weeks, Donovan was supposed to discover Shannon somewhere and claim the reward. They planned to split the cash half and half. As this plan came to light, horrifying details of Shannon's 24-day captivity shocked the nation. Donovan had kept the little girl imprisoned in his dingy apartment, much of the time literally inside the bed frame, a small space under the mattress covered by boards. He routinely sedated her with a cocktail of drugs including temazepam, a sedative, and travel sickness pills to keep her docile and quiet. Shannon later told investigators that she was given medicine that made her sleepy every day. Whenever Donovan left the flat, he tied her up with a leash-like strap so she couldn't wander off or escape. She wasn't allowed sunlight or to see anyone. For nearly a month, a 9-year-old girl lived in darkness, confused and scared, told by her captor that she was on some sort of holiday. She cried for her mum, not knowing that her mum was the one who put her there. When the public learned of Karen's betrayal, the reaction was explosive. The same neighbors who had searched day and night felt utterly betrayed and humiliated. They had held vigils, raised money, and held on to hope alongside a mother who was lying to their faces the entire time. Overnight, Klara Matthews went from pitiable victim to Britain's most hated mother. Crowds gathered outside the Matthews home when the news broke, shouting abuse and hurling objects, furious at Karen's callous deceit. How could a mother do this to her own child? How could she fool an entire nation? The legal consequences were swift. Klara Matthews and Michael Donovan were both arrested and charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. Their trial in late 2008 was a media circus. Prosecutors laid out the evidence of the evil plot, as it was dubbed. They showed phone records of Karen and Donovan planning logistics and CCTV footage proving Karen knew Donovan's house, despite her claiming she didn't know him well. They presented forensic evidence from Donovan's flat, including children's books and toys taken from Karen's home to keep Shannon occupied, and pieces of paper with rehearsed lines for Shannon to tell police once found. One chilling note instructed Shannon to say she had been kidnapped by a woman and taken to a random location. The most damning testimony came from Shannon herself, relayed through intermediaries. She described how, Uncle Michael kept her hidden, gave her Smarties, which were actually pills, to make her sleepy, and told her she was not to see her mummy because Mummy didn't want her anymore. That innocent statement sent a collective shiver through the courtroom. Karen had effectively discarded her child for money. Throughout the trial, Karen continued to lie. She claimed she had nothing to do with it, that Donovan must have taken Shannon on his own. But the jury saw through her crocodile tears. In December 2008, Klara Matthews and Michael Donovan were each convicted on all charges. The judge, clearly outraged, told Karen she had betrayed the trust of her community and, worse, her duty as a mother. In January 2009, they each received an 8-year prison sentence for the kidnapping plot. Under UK guidelines, they would serve roughly half before possible release on license. As Karen was led away to prison, there was little sympathy to be found. The general feeling was that 8 years was not nearly enough punishment for what she had done. Commentators and the public labelled her Britain's worst mum, a title grimly earned. Beyond the crime itself, what disturbed people was the motive, pure greed. Karen wasn't driven by mental illness or blind rage. She coldly and deliberately used her daughter as a pawn in a get-rich-quick scheme. For a $50,000 payout, she was willing to put Shannon through hell and deceive everyone who tried to help. The fallout from the case was wide-ranging. Social services took Shannon and her siblings, Karen had other children, into care immediately. In fact, to protect Shannon from the immense media attention and the infamy of her mother, authorities obtained a court order granting Shannon a new identity. To this day, now an adult in her 20s, Shannon's whereabouts and identity are kept secret for her own safety and peace. Essentially, she had to cease being Shannon Matthews in order to move on with life. The community of Dewsbury was left with deep scars of anger and embarrassment. Many locals resented how the media painted them as naive working-class dupes who fell for Karen's act. There were indeed uncomfortable debates in the press about class prejudice. Some wondered if Karen's background, unemployed, living on benefits in a council estate, made people quicker to vilify her, or conversely, if her appearance and demeanor initially made police underestimate her cunning. Documentaries and books later examined how the media sensationalized the case, at times comparing Karen unfairly to the McCann family, from a higher social class, who were genuine victims of a child abduction. These discussions about class and bias in crime reporting, however, were largely overshadowed by universal condemnation of Karen's deeds. For the officers involved, there was also introspection. Had they missed clues due to biases or assumptions? Early on, one detective had actually noted privately that Karen's behavior seemed odd, but he hesitated to voice suspicion because accusing a distraught mother of faking her child's kidnapping without solid evidence would have been career suicide. It was only as inconsistencies piled up that police dared to consider the unthinkable, that Karen was in on it. In the end, the name Shannon Matthews will forever evoke mixed emotions, relief that she survived her ordeal, and outrage that she was ever put through it at all, by her own mum no less. Shannon's life was thankfully spared, but her innocence was stolen. The community that once rallied for her had to grapple with the betrayal and the media spotlight that followed. Klara Matthews served just under 4 years of her sentence before being released on license in 2012 under a new identity and far from Yorkshire. To this day, if her face is recognized, it provokes fury. She remains one of the most despised figures in recent British criminal history. This case, often dubbed the fake kidnapping, stands as a cautionary tale of how far someone will go for money and how a parent's betrayal can inflict wounds that last a lifetime. For the people of Dewsbury and all who invested their hearts in finding Shannon, the revelation was a punch to the gut. Yet amid the anger, many also felt profound sympathy for Shannon herself, a little girl who learned that the person who should love her most was willing to lock her away in the dark for cash. Out of this darkness, one silver lining is that Shannon was found alive. The public's immense relief at her rescue softened the blow, reminding everyone that unlike other tragic cases, this child got a second chance at life. She was placed with a loving foster family and given the chance to heal away from the spotlight. The memory of seeing Shannon carried safely out of that flat by a police officer, blinking at the sunlight she hadn't seen in weeks, is one the country won't soon forget. For more true crime stories and deep dives like this, subscribe to Crime Unknown. Our next episode uncovers another disturbing case that will leave you questioning everything. Case 3. Julie Schenecker, the Tampa family tragedy. On a chilly January evening in 2011, a 911 call brought police to an upscale home in Tampa, Florida. The caller was a concerned relative asking for a welfare check on 50-year-old Julie Schenecker and her 2 teenage children. When officers entered the beautiful suburban house, nothing could have prepared them for the scene inside. Julie was found in a stupor on the porch, blood splattered on her robe and hands, seemingly dazed. Inside, the officers discovered a crime that stunned even veteran detectives. Julie's children, 16-year-old Calix Schenecker and 13-year-old Bo Schenecker, were dead, each shot in the head at close range. It was a scene of domestic horror. A loving home turned into a bloodbath. The news shocked Florida and soon made national headlines. By outward appearances, Julie Schenecker was the last person anyone would suspect of such a crime. She was the wife of a respected U.S. Army Colonel, Parker Schenecker, a career military man who at that moment was deployed overseas. Julie was a stay-at-home mother, a former military linguist herself, living in a gated community with no obvious signs of trouble. The Scheneckers were seen as a successful, stable family, the kind that hosted neighborhood barbecues and attended their kids' soccer games. But behind closed doors, Julie had been fighting a war within herself for years: severe depression and bipolar disorder. She had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals and was on a cocktail of medications. Close friends and family knew Julie struggled, that she could be withdrawn and erratic at times, but none imagined she could ever become violent, let alone towards her own children. The killings were as deliberate as they were brutal. In the early evening of January 27, 2011, Julie drove to a local gun shop and legally purchased a .38 caliber revolver. Florida's waiting period for handgun purchases had just elapsed from when she first inquired days before, so she was able to pick up the weapon that day, a fact later chillingly confirmed by receipts and the store clerk's testimony. Armed with the revolver, Julie picked up her son Bo from soccer practice a few hours later. As the cheerful 13-year-old sat in the front passenger seat of the family SUV, chatting about his day, Julie raised the gun and shot him twice in the head at point-blank range. Bo never saw it coming. She then drove home, parking the SUV in the garage with Bo's body still inside. Inside the house, her daughter Calix, a talented 16-year-old high school honors student, was upstairs doing her homework on her computer. Julie walked into Calix's room still holding the gun. Calix, who had reportedly been having typical teenage clashes with her mother, calling her crazy to friends and voicing eagerness to leave for college, barely had time to react. Julie pointed the revolver and shot Calix twice in the head, killing her at her desk. The precision was execution-like. In a matter of minutes, Julie had methodically eliminated both of her children. In the aftermath, Julie attempted to take her own life. She wrote a suicide note, a rambling letter in which she apologized to her husband Parker and claimed she had to save the kids, and then went out to the porch with the gun. She put the revolver under her chin and pulled the trigger. Click. The gun was empty. She had fired all the rounds on her children and apparently forgotten to leave one for herself. When police arrived hours later, alerted by Julie's mother, who had received an unsettling email from Julie and couldn't reach the kids by phone, they found Julie shaking uncontrollably, soaked in blood but alive. Bo's body was discovered slumped in the front seat of the SUV, a blanket gently placed over him. Calix's body was in her chair at her desk, as if asleep over her homework. The scenes suggested that after shooting them, Julie had tucked her children in a grotesque imitation of a motherly gesture. What made this case particularly chilling was what Julie herself later told investigators. In a taped confession that would become central at her trial, she recounted the events with an eerie calm. She admitted she had planned the murders for days. She said her children were mouthy and talked back too much. In Julie's warped mind, this was intolerable. She claimed she was tired of them talking back and that she needed to punish them permanently. At one point, when detectives bluntly asked if she regretted killing Calix and Beau, Julie, still sedated from medication and emotionless, replied, "No, I saved them." It's a statement that reveals the depth of her mental breakdown. She apparently believed ending their lives was saving them, perhaps from themselves or from the world, or maybe from the pain she thought she was causing them. Whatever the twisted logic, it was clear Julie Schenecker had made a conscious decision to execute her own children. The trial, which finally took place in May 2014, after years of mental competency evaluations and delays, became a media spectacle. By this time, Colonel Parker Schenecker had returned from deployment to a nightmare. His entire family gone in one night. He divorced Julie while she awaited trial and dedicated himself to honoring Calix and Beau's memory. The prosecution faced a delicate task. They had to prove that despite Julie's documented mental illness, she knew right from wrong when she pulled the trigger. Florida law allows an insanity defense only if the defendant didn't understand the nature of her act or couldn't distinguish its wrongfulness. Julie's defense indeed pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about her bipolar disorder, severe depression, and a long history of psychiatric hospitalizations. They described a woman unraveling. In the months leading up to the crime, Julie had been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility and was on heavy psychotropic medications. Friends said she sometimes slurred her speech and appeared in a fog from the meds. The defense painted Julie as a tragic figure, a loving mother who lost her grip on reality and in a psychotic break believed she was doing the right thing. However, prosecutors powerfully countered this narrative. They pointed to the meticulous planning Julie undertook. She had purchased the gun days in advance, waiting out the mandatory waiting period impatiently. The gun shop owner testified that Julie called multiple times asking if she could get the gun sooner. She even documented her intentions. Investigators found journal entries where Julie wrote about wanting to kill her kids because of their back talk and her desire for silence. On her computer, they found chilling searches like how to quietly kill someone and research on bullet trajectories. The prosecution argued that these were not the actions of someone in a total psychotic haze. These were cold, calculated steps of a person who knew exactly what she was doing. As one prosecutor said in closing arguments, mental illness is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. She knew it was wrong, and she did it anyway. Perhaps the most emotional moment of the trial was the testimony of Colonel Parker Schenecker, Julie's ex-husband, and the father of Calix and Beau. In a steady but grief-strained voice, Parker recounted how he had been serving in the Middle East when he got the news that shattered his life. On the stand, he described his kids in loving detail: Calix, an avid photographer and writer with a bright future; Beau, the jokester who loved sports and video games. Then Parker revealed a haunting encounter. When he first saw Julie after the murders, she looked him in the eye and said coldly, "I guess I stomped your heart flat, huh?" Hearing this in court made jurors flinch. It was hard to reconcile that level of spite with the image of a mother suffering a delusion. This quote underscored the prosecution's argument that Julie's actions had an element of revenge and malice, possibly punishing Parker for being away, or punishing the kids for typical teenage behavior. The jury deliberated for only a couple of hours. They found Julie Schenecker guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, rejecting the insanity defense. Given the heinous nature of the crime, the Florida judge sentenced her to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Julie, then 53, sat motionless as the verdict was read, showing little reaction. In a brief statement, she did express some remorse, saying through tears, "There are people who will never forgive me, and I don't expect them to." But to many, her words rang hollow. Throughout the trial, observers noted her affect would swing from distant and blank to upset only when certain evidence, like her confession tape, was played, almost as if she were more upset at her situation than truly grieving her children. The Schenecker case left the public deeply divided on how to view Julie. Some saw a monster, a cold-blooded killer who executed her own flesh and blood because they sassed her. They pointed to the careful planning and her own chilling words as proof that this was done out of selfish anger, not insanity. Others saw a tragic figure, A mentally ill woman failed by a system that didn't know how to prevent her downward spiral. After all, Julie had reached out for help many times. She had doctors, medications, even short hospital stays. But in the end, none of it prevented this tragedy. Could more aggressive intervention have saved Calix and Beau? It's a question that still lingers. Parker Schenecker himself has urged compassion for those with mental illness, but he firmly believes the jury got it right in holding Julie accountable. In the wake of the trial, Parker devoted himself to creating something positive from the devastation. He established the Calix-Beau Schenecker Memorial Fund, which supports scholastic and athletic programs for youth, reflecting his children's passions. He also became a motivational speaker on resilience and overcoming grief. In interviews, Parker described waking up each day and reminding himself that his mission now is to honor his children's legacy, not to be consumed by hatred for Julie. In fact, Parker said he forgave Julie for what she did, not because it was excusable, it will never be, but because he refused to let bitterness destroy what remained of his own life. Julie Schenecker is currently incarcerated at the Lowell Correctional Institution, a women's prison in Florida, where she will spend the rest of her days. She has occasionally filed appeals, including a high-profile attempt in 2020 claiming she deserved a new trial due to supposed legal errors, and even complaining that jurors were napping during testimony. All her appeals have failed. She will die in prison. Photographs of Julie taken in custody show a physically diminished woman with a blank stare, a far cry from the smiling mom in family portraits from years before. What makes the Schenecker case so unforgettable is the stark contrast between appearance and reality. A family that seemed to have it all, success, affluence, beautiful children, was hiding turmoil that ended in unspeakable violence. It's a sobering reminder that mental illness can lurk behind even the most polished facades, and that the bonds of motherhood, which we expect to be sacred, can be horribly broken. Julie Schenecker's story forces us to ask difficult questions. Could this have been prevented? How do we balance compassion for mental illness with accountability for horrific actions? And perhaps the most haunting, what warning signs might we be missing in those around us? In the end, no explanation or diagnosis will ever justify what Julie did. Two bright young lives, Calix and Beau, were taken in the one place they should have been safest, their own home. And the person who stole their future was the very person who gave them life. It's a chilling reality that once again, evil doesn't always come from a stranger in the dark. Sometimes it comes from inside the home, at the hands of a mother who was supposed to love and protect. If you found this episode compelling, be sure to subscribe to Crime Unknown. In our next story, we'll delve into another disturbing case of a mother's betrayal that will leave you speechless. Case 4. Brittany Pilkington, a mother's deadly jealousy. In August 2015, the small city of Bellefontaine, Ohio, woke up to a tragedy that, once fully uncovered, would horrify the nation. Brittany Pilkington, a 23-year-old mother, confessed to a series of crimes almost unimaginable. Over a span of 13 months, she killed her 3 young sons, one after the other. The revelation left even seasoned investigators shaken. How could a mother methodically smother her own babies, not once, not twice, but 3 times? The Pilkington family lived a modest life in a low-income apartment. To the outside world, they seemed unremarkable, perhaps struggling financially, but not unlike many young families. Brittany was a quiet, shy woman. Her husband, Joseph Pilkington, was 2 decades her senior. In fact, their relationship was deeply disturbing in itself. Joseph had originally been Brittany's mother's boyfriend, practically a stepfather figure before he started a sexual relationship with Brittany when she was a teenager. This secretive and illicit dynamic set the stage for a family life marked by tension, suspicion, and dysfunction. Relatives and neighbors sensed something off over the years. Some found Joseph's presence controlling, others noted Brittany's withdrawn demeanor, but no one could have predicted what Brittany would eventually do. The string of deaths began on July 22, 2014. Brittany's 3-month-old infant son, Niall, was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. He was unresponsive, and despite doctors' efforts, did not survive. At the time, The cause of death was presumed to be sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, a tragic but not unheard of event. There were no obvious signs of foul play on the tiny body, and given the family's chaotic situation, multiple kids, financial stress, authorities did not immediately suspect anything criminal. Brittany appeared genuinely distraught over Niall's death, and she accepted the condolences with quiet tears. But barely 9 months later, tragedy struck the Pilkington household again. On April 6, 2015, Brittany's 4-year-old son, Gavin, was found unresponsive in his bed early in the morning. Once again, emergency responders were called, and once again, the child could not be revived. This time, doctors were perplexed. A healthy 4-year-old dying in his sleep is far more unusual than an infant SIDS case. An autopsy on Gavin came back inconclusive. There were no obvious injuries or reasons for his sudden death. Whispers began among the medical staff and investigators. Could this family be cursed with some genetic defect or environmental poison, or was something more sinister at work? Still, with only vague suspicions and a grieving mother to console, no action was taken against Brittany. She now had lost 2 sons in less than a year, and outwardly she seemed the picture of misery. Then, on August 18, 2015, around 3 a.m., a 911 call came from the Pilkington residence. Brittany's 3-month-old, the couple's 4th child, another infant boy named Noah, was not breathing. Paramedics arrived to find yet another baby dead in his crib. 3 young sons, all deceased under mysterious circumstances. This was beyond any statistically plausible tragedy. Something was terribly wrong. The very next day, Brittany Pilkington was taken into custody for questioning. Confronted by detectives, the 23-year-old mother eventually confessed to what authorities had begun to suspect. She had smothered each of her boys to death. The motive she gave was as shocking as the crimes themselves. Brittany stated that she felt jealous and neglected. She believed her husband Joseph paid more attention to the boys than to their daughter, a 3-year-old girl who remained unharmed, and more attention to the boys than to her. In Brittany's warped reasoning, she thought that by eliminating the sons, Joseph would focus his affection back on her and their daughter. She reportedly told investigators, in a flat voice, that her husband favored the boys, and she just didn't want to watch them grow up being favored over her daughter. It was as if in Brittany's mind, love was a zero-sum game, and she was removing the competition one by one. The details that came out were haunting. Brittany admitted that in each case she acted when Joseph was out of the house. He worked night shifts. She would wait until the boys were asleep, then place a blanket or pillow over their faces and hold it there until they stopped breathing. Niall, the first infant, was killed in his crib. Months later, she crept into 4-year-old Gavin's room in the early morning and pressed a pillow over his face, a mother snuffing out the very child she had rocked to sleep. Gavin was old enough that he likely woke and struggled, but Brittany was determined. Finally, baby Noah met the same fate as his older brother Niall. After each death, Brittany shed tears and played the role of the stunned, grieving mother, never admitting what she'd done. When the case became public, people were horrified not only by Brittany's actions, but also by the system's failure to catch on after the first 2 deaths. Why hadn't Child Protective Services or law enforcement stepped in sooner? In hindsight, Gavin's death should have raised massive red flags. 2 children in one family dying unexpectedly in separate incidents is extremely rare. But investigators had been cautious, perhaps not wanting to leap to accusing a mother without evidence. Additionally, Brittany was adept at feigning shock and sorrow. There were even reports that at Gavin's funeral, Brittany threw herself weeping on the little boy's casket, a display now viewed as grotesque in its falseness. Brittany's background came under intense scrutiny, and it painted a picture of a deeply troubled young woman. She had a low IQ, reportedly in the borderline intellectual functioning range, and was described by teachers as slow when she was in school. More disturbingly, she grew up in chaos. Her father figure, who later became her husband, was grooming and molesting her from a young age. Court records revealed that Joseph Pilkington began a sexual relationship with Brittany when she was just 17 and he was 42. In fact, he impregnated her when she was still a minor. To avoid statutory rape charges, Joseph ended up marrying Brittany when she turned 18. This meant Brittany's entire teen-to-adult life was under Joseph's control, moving straight from being an abused child to an isolated housewife. The power imbalance was enormous. Joseph had been a sort of stepdad, then became her husband, and he was reportedly domineering. Brittany's defense lawyers argued that she lived in a state of learned helplessness and trauma, with Joseph essentially controlling her world. Psychological experts evaluated Brittany and found evidence of severe depression and PTSD. One forensic psychologist testified that Brittany exhibited flat affect and signs of dissociation, indicating she might have been emotionally numb during the killings. However, prosecutors noted that she clearly understood what she was doing was wrong. After all, she hid her crimes and even seemed to choose times, like nighttime, to avoid detection. As the legal proceedings unfolded, many expected Brittany Pilkington to face the death penalty. Ohio prosecutors initially charged her with multiple counts of aggravated murder and signaled they would seek capital punishment. This sparked debate. Should the state execute a young mother who was arguably a victim of abuse herself? The case dragged on for years with pre-trial arguments. Brittany's defense team worked tirelessly to save her life, amassing evidence of her childhood abuse, cognitive impairments, and extreme mental stress. They even pointed to medical scans showing brain damage, possibly from lead poisoning as a baby, and repeated head trauma in childhood. All these, they argued, made her incapable of fully controlling her impulses or understanding the permanence of her actions. Finally, in 2019, a plea deal was reached that took the death penalty off the table. In exchange for Brittany's guilty plea to multiple counts of murder, prosecutors agreed to a sentence of life in prison with a possibility of parole after decades. Specifically, Brittany pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 1 count of involuntary manslaughter for Niall's death, which was initially thought to be Sid's, and was sentenced to 37 years to life in prison. With credit for time served awaiting trial, she would be around 60 years old before she could first be considered for parole, effectively ensuring she spends most of her life behind bars. In court during the plea and sentencing, Brittany was soft-spoken and tearful. She offered a brief apology for what she had done, though many felt it could never be enough. Joseph Pilkington, who astonishingly had initially stood by Brittany when she was first arrested, later said he could never forgive her. The community's sympathy, which initially was with Brittany as a grieving mother, had long since shifted entirely to the innocent children who were betrayed. Many openly wondered why Joseph himself wasn't more scrutinized. Indeed, Joseph was eventually convicted of sexual battery for his relationship with Brittany when she was underage. He served a mere 6 months in jail for that, a fact that outraged those who saw him as a catalyst in this tragedy. The surviving child, Brittany's daughter, who was around 3 when her brothers died and 8 by the time of the plea deal, was placed in the custody of a county foster family and later adopted. In a gut-wrenching moment at sentencing, a caregiver read a statement about this little girl. It described how she sometimes talks to herself, saying her brothers' names and assuring herself that they are always with her. The weight of that statement drove home the lifelong impact of Brittany's actions on the one child she left alive. To this day, the Pilkington case leaves people grappling with complex emotions. On one hand, there is unbridled anger. How could a mother kill her own babies out of something as petty as jealousy? It feels almost inhuman, an ultimate betrayal of maternal instinct. On the other hand, when one looks at Brittany's life, there's an element of tragic inevitability. A girl abused and groomed who became a mother too young and unprepared, who cracked under pressure she couldn't verbalize or seek help for. It raises important questions about how society and social services handle vulnerable young mothers, especially those with a history of trauma and exploitation. One aspect is clear. This was a preventable tragedy that slipped through the cracks. After Niall's death, perhaps it could be written off as CDS. But after Gavin's, authorities might have dug deeper. Why wasn't Brittany given a psychological evaluation after losing 2 children? Why didn't doctors spot patterns or bruising? In retrospect, a deeper investigation after Gavin's death might have saved Noah. The local authorities conducted reviews to improve how unexplained child deaths are handled. Now, multiple infant deaths in one family, trigger more rigorous scrutiny. Brittany Pilkington now spends her days in an Ohio prison, reportedly in protective custody given the notoriety of her case. Even among inmates, child killers, especially a mother who killed her kids, are reviled. Her story stands as a sorrowful example of what can happen when cycles of abuse and mental illness collide with dire consequences. It's small comfort, but perhaps lessons learned from this case will prevent others. At its heart, the story is about children, Niall, Gavin and Noah, whose lives were snuffed out before they even really began. 3 little boys who should have been laughing, playing, growing up together, but instead became victims of a twisted notion of love and jealousy. And a little girl who will grow up carrying the weight of what happened forever in the shadow of her brother's absence. Thank you for listening to this harrowing story. For more in-depth true crime documentaries, subscribe to Crime Unknown. Next, we investigate a case from Italy that shocked an entire country. Case 5. Veronica Panarello, the little boy who knew too much. In the early hours of November 29, 2014, panic gripped the quiet Sicilian town of Santa Croce Camarina. Veronica Panarello, a 26-year-old mother, reported that her 8-year-old son, Loris Stevel, had gone missing. Veronica told police that she had driven Loris to school that morning, but when she went to pick him up in the afternoon, he wasn't there. The teachers said Loris had never arrived at school at all. As evening fell with no sign of the boy, a search operation swept across the town. Neighbors, volunteers, police and firefighters combed the streets and countryside with flashlights, calling Loris's name. The whole community rallied. Child disappearances were virtually unheard of in this area, and everyone feared the worst. Tragically, by nightfall, the worst had come. Loris's lifeless body was found in a remote gully, a rocky canal or ravine, on the outskirts of town. A hunter searching in the area spotted what looked like a small bundle and discovered the boy. The scene was grim. Loris was still wearing his school backpack, but his body showed signs of foul play. Investigators noted red ligature marks on his neck and wounds on his head and arms. Nearby, some of his belongings were scattered, a tiny shoe here, his backpack there. It looked as if someone had tried to make it appear Loris was attacked by a stranger and dumped. From the very start, however, detectives sensed that something about Veronica's story did not add up. For one, surveillance cameras in Santa Croce Camarina, small as the town was, it had a few, captured footage of Veronica's car driving away from Loris's school route that morning, at a time she claimed she was dropping him off. In fact, no cameras ever showed her car near the school at all that day. Investigators quietly verified attendance records. Indeed, Loris had never made it to class. When confronted with this discrepancy, Veronica's account began to shift in suspicious ways. She floundered, suggesting maybe Loris had decided to skip school on his own, or that she might have dropped him farther from the gate than usual. These explanations were thin, and police grew increasingly wary. As the investigation tightened, forensic analysis revealed chilling details. Loris's cause of death was strangulation with plastic electrical cable ties, the kind used to secure wires. Essentially, he had been garroted. This was not an accident or a simple kidnapping gone wrong. It was a calculated murder. And given the lack of any signs of sexual assault or robbery, the profile of the crime pointed close to home, often to a family member. Investigators started to focus squarely on Veronica Panarello herself. Under mounting evidence, Veronica's behavior oscillated between grief and defensiveness. At first, she vehemently denied involvement. She portrayed herself as a devastated mother, even attending a candlelight vigil and throwing herself dramatically over Loris's small coffin at the funeral. But privately, police observed she could be oddly cold. During one interrogation, an officer noted that Veronica was more concerned about whether she was being considered a suspect than about finding who killed Loris. Then Veronica suddenly changed her story in a bombshell way. Months after the murder, as evidence kept implicating her, including her own cell phone records placing her near the gully where Loris was found, Veronica offered a new explanation. She claimed that her father-in-law, Andrea Stevel, Loris's grandfather, was the real killer. In a dramatic accusation, Veronica told authorities that she had been having an affair with her father-in-law, Andrea. She said on the morning of the murder, Loris had walked in on them being intimate. According to Veronica, Andrea panicked that Loris would tell the family about the affair, so he attacked the boy. She alleged that Andrea strangled Loris with the electrical ties, while she herself was present but too afraid to stop him. Veronica further claimed that Andrea then forced her to help dispose of the body in the gully, threatening to kill her too if she spoke out. This story was explosive. It added incest, betrayal, and a second potential perpetrator to the already tragic case. However, investigators found zero evidence to support Veronica's tale. In fact, Andrea Stiefel had a solid alibi. Phone and witness records showed he was elsewhere at the time of Loris's death. There was no forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene or Loris's body. And Andrea, a man in his 60s, flatly denied any affair or involvement, calling Veronica's claims monstrous lies. Later, in court, Veronica's own psych evaluations suggested she had narcissistic tendencies and a habit of lying to shift blame. It became clear to authorities that Veronica's story was likely a desperate fabrication, an attempt to cast herself as a victim, and sow reasonable doubt by accusing someone else, even if that meant dragging her husband's innocent father through the mud. As the trial proceeded in 2016, prosecutors laid out the scenario they believed happened. On that morning of November 29th, Veronica and Loris had a heated argument at home, possibly over something trivial, like the boy not wanting to eat breakfast or an issue about an electrical cord he found, a detail rumored in local media. In a burst of rage, Veronica strangled her son from behind, using the plastic cable ties, a quick and deadly method that might have been within her slight frame's capability, because 8-year-old Loris was a small child. An autopsy indicated Loris may have been unconscious, but not yet dead, when Veronica decided to get rid of him. She likely dragged or carried her son's limp body to her car, possibly still alive but faintly. She then drove out of town. Security cameras caught her car on a country road where it normally shouldn't have been, another red flag. At a secluded spot by the gully, Veronica dumped Loris, possibly inflicting the head wound and scratches in the process of pushing him down into the ravine. Some evidence suggested Loris might have still been clinging to life when abandoned, meaning he could have died alone in that ditch after his own mother left him there. It's a haunting thought. After disposing of her child, Veronica attempted a crude cover-up. She tossed some of Loris's belongings around to stage a scene. She then calmly went about part of her day, even attending a voluntary training course, before eventually raising the alarm that afternoon that Loris was missing. The timeline, phone records, surveillance, and inconsistencies in her statements all lined up to this narrative of premeditated filicide, the act of a parent killing their child. As motive, prosecutors argued that Veronica saw Loris as an obstacle to her freedom. She was a young mother of 2, Loris had a younger brother, who reportedly often felt tied down and frustrated. Her relationship with her husband, who was often away for work, was strained. Some who knew her described Veronica as self-absorbed and easily irritated by parenting demands. A theory emerged that perhaps Veronica resented the attention Loris needed, or he had witnessed something, like her extramarital activities. Although the affair story with the father-in-law was unproven, there were rumors Veronica led a life seeking more freedom and fun, which a child could inhibit. Another theory was that it might have been a sudden rage that turned deadly. But the subsequent cover-up indicated consciousness of guilt and calculation. She didn't call an ambulance. She chose to hide him. That speaks volumes. During the trial, Veronica remained defiant. She continued to insist she was innocent and that Andrea Stiefel was the real culprit, sticking to that story even as evidence tore it apart. The Italian press dubbed her the liar mom for her ever-changing stories. Psychiatrists who evaluated Veronica found she was mentally fit to stand trial and not insane, though they noted she had a personality disorder characterized by lies and lack of empathy. In contrast, Loris's father, David Stiefel, cut a tragic figure, a grieving dad who also had to grapple with the horrifying realization that his wife killed their child and then falsely accused his own father. David filed for divorce and obtained sole custody of their surviving younger son, shielding him from his mother. In October 2016, Veronica Panarello was convicted of murdering her son Loris and concealing his body. The judge didn't mince words, calling her an unscrupulous liar. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison, Italy's maximum sentence short of life imprisonment, which isn't common in cases without multiple victims. The verdict noted the crime was premeditated and carried out with cruelty, emphasizing how a mother should protect her child, not take his life. Veronica showed little visible remorse as the sentence was read. She wept, but observers were unsure if it was out of regret or just self-pity at her fate. Even after her conviction, Veronica hasn't stopped spinning tales. From prison, she gave interviews insisting Andrea Stivel should be in jail instead of her. Andrea, for his part, sued Veronica for defamation, and Italian courts tacked on an additional 2-year sentence to Veronica for slandering him with false accusations. This clearly established legally that her story about Andrea was a lie. Still, Veronica clings to that narrative, maintaining her innocence to anyone who will listen. Notably, no one really listens anymore. For the people of Santa Croce Camarina, the murder of Loris was a loss of innocence for their community. Many had initially rallied around Veronica, heartbroken for a mother who lost her child, only to feel anger and disgust upon learning she was behind it all. At Loris's funeral, the local priest openly condemned the lies that had compounded the tragedy, a pointed reference to Veronica's behavior. This case struck a nerve across Italy because it combined themes of family betrayal, deceit, and innocence destroyed. The idea that a mother could kill her child is difficult to fathom in any culture, but in Italy, where la mamma is almost sacred, it was truly scandalous. The sensational details, the alleged affair with the grandfather, the use of cable ties, the attempted framing, made it headline material for years. Italian media often compared Veronica to other notorious female killers and debated whether she was diabolically evil or severely disturbed, or both. In any event, the result is the same. A little boy, Loris Stivel, lost his life at the hands of the person he trusted most. His younger brother will grow up without him, and one day will have to confront the truth of what their mother did. Loris's father, Davide, said in a heartbreaking statement that every time he closes his eyes, he's tormented by thinking of what Loris's final minutes must have been like, the confusion and betrayal his son must have felt. Veronica Panarello will be middle-aged by the time her 30-year sentence is up, if she serves it fully, likely out in late middle age. Few doubt that she did what she was convicted of despite her continued denials. In the end, this case is a stark reminder that sometimes a murderer is not a masked stranger or a scorned lover, but a parent, and that the darkest secrets can hide within a family. The little town where it happened will never be the same, and the Stivel family must carry on, forever scarred by the knowledge of who took their precious Loris away. Thank you for following this case. For more true crime stories from around the world, subscribe to Crime Unknown. Coming up next, a case from the UK where a mother's shocking selfishness led her to commit the unthinkable. Case 6. Louise Porton got in the way of her love life. In January 2018, emergency operators in Warwickshire, England, received a call from a young mother of 2. Louise Porton, 23, said her 3-year-old daughter was not breathing. Paramedics rushed to the scene and found little Lexi Draper, just 3 years old, in distress. Lexi was rushed to the hospital, but tragically, she was pronounced dead soon after. Doctors were puzzled. Lexi had been treated for what appeared to be a chest infection just a week prior, but nothing life-threatening. Louise's demeanor at the hospital raised eyebrows. She was cold, almost indifferent. While other relatives were weeping and shocked, Louise appeared calm, scrolling on her phone, even cracking a half-smile at one point. Medical staff found it odd, but grief can manifest in strange ways, they thought. Less than 18 days later, on February 1st, 2018, an eerily similar situation unfolded. Louise called emergency services again, this time from the side of a road. She claimed her 17-month-old baby girl, Scarlett Vaughan, had suddenly stopped breathing while they were driving. Despite desperate attempts by paramedics on the way to the hospital, Scarlett was also pronounced dead. 2 children, Lexi and now Scarlett, gone within days of each other. Both sisters, both previously healthy. This was beyond a tragic coincidence, and authorities knew it. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on Louise Porton. As police and medical examiners dug into the circumstances, a horrifying portrait of Louise began to emerge, that of a mother who saw her own kids as nothing more than obstacles to her personal life. Investigators discovered that in the hours immediately following Lexi's death, while her toddler's body lay in the morgue, Louise was on her phone swiping through dating apps, flirting with men online, and even arranging to meet up with someone for sex. Text message records showed Louise sending explicit selfies and cheerful messages to multiple guys literally the same day Lexi died. This was not the behavior of a heartbroken mother. Digging deeper, police retrieved Louise's internet search history. What they found was chilling. In the days before Lexi's death, Louise had Googled phrases like, "How long does it take a body to go cold?" "How to get rid of air from lungs," and "Ways to kill by suffocation." At one point she searched, "Can you die from having your head held underwater?" These sinister queries painted a clear picture of premeditation. It seemed Louise had been researching how to quietly murder her children and make it look like natural causes. Investigators also uncovered disturbing behavior in the weeks between her daughter's deaths. Surveillance footage from a funeral home captured Louise at Lexi's pre-funeral viewing, and she was seen laughing and joking around on a phone call near her child's coffin. A funeral arranger overheard Louise on FaceTime with a man giggling 2 days before Scarlett died. It was as if she had not a care in the world. With mounting evidence, police arrested Louise Porton under suspicion of murder. Under questioning, Louise remained eerily calm and denied harming her kids. She claimed first Lexi, then Scarlett just fell ill and stopped breathing, insisting she had nothing to do with it. But confronted with her phone data and searches, she had no good answers. She tried to say those searches were random or for education. Unsurprisingly, detectives didn't buy it. By the time the case went to trial in mid-2019, the prosecution was ready with a damning case. In court, the prosecution laid out the narrative clearly. Louise Porton wanted to live a party girl lifestyle, one that didn't include the responsibility of 2 young children. She viewed Lexi and Scarlett as burdens who kept her from her pursuits of men, sex, and nightlife. Evidence showed that Louise often left the toddlers alone, locked in a room for hours, while she went out to have fun, effectively neglecting them. One friend testified that Louise had even joked about getting rid of her kids so she could do what she wanted. It seemed unthinkable then. Sadly, it became reality. The timeline presented was chilling. On January 15, 2018, Lexi was hospitalized with breathing difficulties. Paramedics saved her that time, and doctors noted it was almost like she had been temporarily deprived of oxygen, though they thought it was a severe infection. In hindsight, prosecutors said this was likely Louise's first attempt to kill Lexi, which failed. Just 2 days after Lexi was discharged, on January 4, 2018, Lexi was rushed to hospital again and nearly died, but survived due to skilled resuscitation by paramedics. Each time, Louise's explanations were vague. After those tries didn't finish the job, Louise succeeded on January 15th. She suffocated Lexi for good and delayed calling an ambulance long enough to ensure Lexi could not be revived. Phone records and CCTV indicated that on the morning Lexi actually died, Louise waited over an hour after Lexi stopped breathing before seeking help, likely to guarantee irreversible brain death. Then, less than 3 weeks later, on February 1st, Louise put her plan into action again on baby Scarlett. Incredibly, during that short period, while supposedly grieving Lexi, Louise was recorded on CCTV at a petrol station, calmly filling up her car with fuel, while Scarlett lay dead or dying in the back seat. She had delayed calling emergency services for Scarlett as well, likely until she was certain the 17-month-old was beyond saving. Witnesses described Louise at that gas station as completely emotionless. The sheer callousness is mind-boggling. The medical evidence backed up the prosecution. Both girls had signs consistent with deliberate airway obstruction, i.e. smothering, and no natural cause could be found for either death. It was near impossible that 2 children from the same mother would die of unrelated natural causes just days apart. The odds were astronomical, unless the mother made it happen. Louise Porton took the stand in her own defense, but her cool, detached affect did her no favors. She stuck to her story that she didn't do anything and that her searches were misunderstood. The jury, however, needed only 6 hours to reach a verdict, guilty of murdering both Lexi and Scarlett. The judge, Mrs. Justice Yip, did not mince words at sentencing. She told Louise, "One way or another you squeezed the life out of each of your daughters. I have no doubt you delayed calling the emergency services until you were sure they were dead." She pointed out how evil and calculated Louise's actions were, noting how Louise had accepted 41 new friend requests from men on a dating app the day after Lexi died. The judge was horrified by how Porton had even taken topless photos of herself in a hospital bathroom while Lexi was ill in intensive care. It was clear Louise had absolutely no maternal instinct or remorse. Louise Porton was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 32 years before she can even be considered for release. Given her age, 23 at sentencing, this means she'll be in her mid-50s at the earliest possibility of getting out, and even then, public outrage suggests she may never be paroled. Public reaction to the Porton case was one of visceral disgust. British tabloids dubbed her the Tinder monster, or evil mum, who killed her kids for interrupting her sex life. Indeed, the prosecution explicitly stated that her children got in the way of her doing what she wanted, when she wanted, with whom she wanted. Louise's case triggered debates about young motherhood and support systems. Was she overwhelmed and snapped, or simply a narcissist who valued her own pleasure above her children's lives? The evidence leaned strongly toward the latter. Psychiatrists who examined Louise found no sign of postpartum depression or psychosis. She was deemed fully aware of her actions. It appeared she was just astonishingly self-centered and heartless, one detail that truly emphasized her chilling indifference. After killing Lexi, while people were raising money for Lexi's funeral, Louise texted her sister, seemingly more excited about how much money she might get from the fundraiser than upset about the death. She used some of that fund, meant for funeral costs, to buy new lingerie and outfits, presumably to go meet men. In the aftermath, authorities looked back to see if any warning signs were missed. It turned out some were there. For instance, an ex-landlady reported that Louise would routinely leave the babies home alone to go out partying, and that she, the landlady, ended up caring for the kids often. But such reports never reached social services in time. After Lexi's earlier hospitalizations in January, doctors did consider non-accidental injury, but couldn't prove it then. With Scarlett's death soon after it became clear, the Louise Porton case serves as a disturbing reminder that not all mothers are wired to love or protect their children. It forces a confrontation with something we'd rather not imagine. A mother capable of calculatedly murdering her innocent toddlers simply because they interfered with her nightlife. It's a deeply uncomfortable narrative because it violates one of society's most fundamental expectations, the unconditional love of a parent. Louise's face, captured in a mugshot with a slight smirk, has since become infamous in the UK as an emblem of maternal betrayal. For the families of Lexi and Scarlett, their father was estranged and did not live with them. The sorrow is incalculable. Two beautiful little girls with big blue eyes and curly hair lost their lives before they even really had a chance to live, all because their mother preferred to trade parental responsibility for fleeting attention from men on the internet. In prison, reports say Louise remains isolated for her own safety. Child killers are often targeted by other inmates, and she continues to insist she's innocent. She even appealed her conviction, but it was swiftly denied. The evidence was overwhelming. This case shook the UK in 2019, and it remains one of the most stark examples of how selfishness and evil can nest within a person who outwardly wore the title of mum. As the judge aptly summarized, "Your actions have no justification. You put your own selfish desires above the lives of your children. There can be no greater breach of trust than a mother killing her babies." For more revealing true crime documentaries, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Unknown. In our next episode, we delve into one of Europe's most bizarre and disturbing child abuse cases, a story of torture and cult-like deception that will leave you speechless. Case 7, Klara Mauerova, the Kurim child abuse cult case. In May 2007, a quiet suburban neighborhood in the Czech town of Kurim was shattered by a discovery so horrific it defied imagination. It started innocently. A man setting up a baby monitor for his infant accidentally picked up a different signal, one coming from a nearby house. On the monitor's screen, instead of his baby, he saw a naked, bruised little boy chained in a dark closet, crying for help. Shocked and confused, the man called police. What authorities found when they raided the neighboring home would uncover one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse, intertwined with cult-like fanaticism and deceit in European history. The house belonged to Klara Mauerova, a 31-year-old mother of two young boys, 8-year-old Andrei and 10-year-old Jakub. Klara lived there with her sister, Katarzyna Mauerova, and a few others who seemed to be helping with the kids. By outward appearances, Klara Mauerova was a caring single mum trying to do her best. But behind closed doors, she and a group of accomplices had turned that house into a chamber of unspeakable tortures for the two boys. When police entered the home, they uncovered scenes of almost medieval cruelty. Little Andrei and Jakub were found locked in cages and confined spaces. They were emaciated, scarred, and terrified. It quickly became clear this wasn't a case of momentary loss of temper or neglect. It was prolonged, systematic torture. Evidence showed the boys had been beaten routinely. They bore burn marks on their skin. Shockingly, investigators learned the children had at times been forced to cut themselves with knives or had their captors cut their skin. They were made to eat their own vomit and excrement as a form of sadistic punishment. Neighbors recalled that sometimes through the walls they heard muffled screams or odd noises, but no one imagined the extent of what was happening. Initially, Klara wept and claimed she had lost control of discipline and didn't know how things got so bad. But as the police dug deeper, they realized something even more sinister was afoot. Klara was not acting alone. She was part of a strange cult-like group that had orchestrated much of the abuse. The investigation unveiled a bizarre figure at the center, a 33-year-old woman named Barbara Szklarlova. Barbara's role in this saga is nothing short of surreal. She was found at the house initially posing as a 13-year-old girl named Aniczka, who Klara claimed was her adopted daughter. In reality, Barbara was an adult woman who had for years been masquerading as a child to infiltrate families and cults. With a petite frame and a baby-faced look, Barbara fooled many, even authorities, into believing she was a vulnerable young teen. Klara had introduced Aniczka to friends and officials as a child in need of care and unbelievably had gotten away with it. Why the ruse? It turns out Barbara Szklarlova was the mastermind orchestrating the torture of Klara's boys. She was a devotee of a shadowy religious sect known as the Grail movement, though the sect itself disavowed the abuse, and along with Klara's sister Katarzyna had developed warped spiritual beliefs. They believed inflicting pain on the boys was a form of cleansing or testing. Barbara manipulated the Mauerova sisters, especially the emotionally pliable Klara, into thinking that abusing the children was somehow for the boys' own good or for some higher purpose. At Barbara's direction, the group would conduct sadistic rituals. The boys were chained in a cellar or closet for days, naked and in darkness. They were denied food and water to purify them. On some occasions, they were dunked repeatedly in cold water, essentially waterboarded, under the guise of baptism or punishment. Barbara, as Aniczka, would sometimes pretend to be a fellow victim to earn the boys' trust and then betray them. The psychological torment was as severe as the physical. One particularly gruesome element, media later reported that parts of this cult's rituals may have involved cannibalism. There were allegations that slices of the boys' flesh were cut off and consumed by the group. During the trial, one of the co-accused admitted that under Barbara and Katarzyna's instructions, they cooked pieces of one boy's flesh and made the child eat it, though these details are so horrific they border on unbelievable. But in this case, truth was indeed stranger and darker than fiction. After the police intervention, the boys were immediately taken into protective care, receiving medical attention and psychological support. Their ordeal had lasted for nearly a year. Andrei, the younger, had spent months locked in a small wooden crate, let out only to endure further abuse. Jakub had been slightly less targeted, but still suffered greatly. The boys were understandably deeply traumatized. Seasoned officers who rescued them had to step aside and weep. It was that bad. The story kept twisting. After the raid, Barbara Škrlová managed to flee the Czech Republic. Astonishingly, she turned up in Norway months later, now pretending to be a 13-year-old boy named Adam. She even enrolled in a school in Oslo, fooling a foster family into taking her in. It was only when Interpol and Czech authorities circulated her photo that Norwegian police realized Adam was actually the wanted Barbara. Her capacity to deceive was incredible. She had convincingly played both a teenage girl and boy in different countries, taking advantage of people's goodwill. By late 2007, Barbara was extradited back to the Czech Republic to face justice alongside the Mauerova sisters and others involved. The trial, which took place in 2008, riveted the nation and much of Europe. 6 people were charged in total: Klara Mauerova, the mother, Katarzyna Mauerova, the aunt, Barbara Škrlová, and 3 additional cult members who aided in the abuse, including Jan Turek and siblings Jan Škrla, Barbara's brother, and Hanna Bashova, nicknamed Aunt Nancy. The evidence presented was overwhelming and disturbing. The court heard testimony from the boys, through child psychologists, about how they were burned with cigarettes, cut with knives, kept in filthy conditions and psychologically tormented by threats of a mysterious figure called the Doctor, who would kill them if they didn't obey. This Doctor appeared to be a fictional boogeyman Barbara concocted as part of the cult narrative. Though in a bizarre twist, Klara claimed a man from Azerbaijan was instructing them. This was never substantiated and believed to be part of the cult's lore. Klara Mauerova during the trial broke down and expressed remorse, saying she was manipulated by Barbara and her own sister. She said she loved her children, but was made to believe that the abuse was for their salvation, that she was saving their souls by obeying the cult's commands. Many found it hard to sympathize. No matter the brainwashing, how could a mother participate in such cruelty? Katarzyna, the aunt, was identified as perhaps the most zealous follower of the cult. Some evidence suggested she was the one who had initiated contacting Barbara, and together they roped in Klara. Barbara Škrlová, for her part, tried to play victim. When she took the stand, she claimed she had been abused by unknown men and was forced into these identities, a story the court flatly rejected as another fabrication. The judges saw her as the prime instigator and a cunning manipulator. In October 2008, the court delivered its verdicts and sentences. Klara Mauerova was found guilty of grievous bodily harm, abuse, and depriving her children of liberty. She received 9 years in prison. Katarzyna Mauerova was found even more culpable in initiating the abuse and lying to authorities. She got 10 years. Barbara Škrlová, the masquerading Anička Adam, was convicted of cruelty and conspiracy. She was given a relatively light sentence of 5 years, which outraged the public. Many felt she deserved far more. The others, Jan Turek, Jan Škrla, and Hanna Bashova, got sentences ranging from 5 to 7 years for their roles. These sentences might seem short, given the crimes, but Czech law at the time had a maximum of 12-15 years for these charges, and life sentences are rare unless it's murder. Still, many were shocked that Barbara could be out in just a few years after masterminding such a nightmare. The aftermath saw much soul-searching in the Czech Republic. How did no one notice these boys' plight earlier? How did Barbara fool so many people, including social workers, who at one point approved Klara's adoption of the fake Anička? The case exposed flaws in the child welfare system and the dangers of unverified identities. For Ondřej and Jakub, the healing process was long. They were placed in a safe foster environment under new identities to shield them from media and the notoriety of their story. Reports say they struggled with PTSD, had to relearn how to trust adults, and bore physical scars that would last a lifetime. The father of the boys, Klara's ex-husband, was devastated. He had been estranged, and said he never imagined his children would suffer like this in their mother's care. The Kurim case stands as one of the most bizarre criminal cases in modern history. Child abuse wrapped in layers of deception and cult influence. It's like a grim fairy tale. A wicked child who was actually an adult puppet master, a mother turned to evil under the spell of a cult, and innocent children locked away like Hansel and Gretel. It forced people to realize that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they appear as a kindly aunt, a concerned friend, or even a child in need. In this case, they were all those things, and that is terrifying. By 2013, most of the perpetrators had served their sentences and been released back into society, under supervision. Barbara tried to slip into obscurity upon release, likely changing her name after serving her 5-year term, but her infamy follows her. The Mauerova sisters also were released eventually. One can only hope they never regain custody or contact with those boys. In the end, this case leaves us with a hard lesson. Question what doesn't seem right. It was sheer luck that a neighbor's baby monitor picked up that video feed. Without that technological fluke, who knows how long the torture of Andre and Jakub would have continued, or if they would even be alive today. Sometimes heroes arrive in unusual ways, like a crossed signal revealing a hidden horror. If you found this case astonishing, subscribe to Crime Unknown for more deep-dive true crime episodes. Next, we examine a shocking American case of a mother who executed her own sons and the recent twist in her fate. Case 8, Susan Eubanks. A deadly night in California. On the night of October 26, 1997, in a normally peaceful suburb of San Marcos, California, a distraught man placed a frantic call to 911. He had just spoken with his girlfriend, 33-year-old Susan Eubanks, and what she told him was beyond comprehension. She said she had just killed her 4 sons. Sheriff's deputies raced to the address, not knowing what they would find. The scene they walked into would haunt them forever. Inside the modest 1-story home, officers discovered a massacre. In one bedroom lay 14-year-old Brandon Armstrong, Susan's eldest from a previous relationship, shot point-blank in the head. In another room, 7-year-old Austin Eubanks and 6-year-old Brigham Eubanks were found lifeless, each shot in the head execution style on their beds. The youngest, 4-year-old Matthew Eubanks, was barely alive when deputies arrived. He had a bullet wound to his little head, but was clinging to life on the floor among his toys. Susan herself was in a back bedroom, bleeding from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the stomach, lying next to the .38 caliber revolver that had wrought all this carnage. Paramedics arrived and rushed Matthew to the hospital, but tragically he died the next day when doctors determined there was no brain activity. All 4 boys were gone. Seasoned law enforcement officers stood in those blood-stained bedrooms and openly wept. It was a scene of utter horror. 4 innocent children shot execution style by their own mother. As one deputy said later, "It was the most disturbing call of my career. We knew what happened. We couldn't fathom why. The community was in shock. Neighbors had considered Susan a struggling single mom, sure, but a loving one. How could this happen?" The answer seemed rooted in a toxic brew of anger, revenge, and Susan's deteriorating mental state. In the months leading up to that night, Susan Eubanks's life was spiraling out of control. She had recently separated from her second husband, the father of the 3 younger boys, Eric Eubanks, and it was an ugly split. There were allegations of domestic violence. Susan had accused Eric of beating her, and indeed he had been convicted of spousal battery earlier that year. She had a restraining order against him. They were also mired in financial troubles. Susan was deep in debt, over $40,000 in credit card bills, and had just been ordered by a court to pay child support for Brandon, her eldest, who had a different father. On top of that, Susan struggled with substance abuse. She was drinking heavily and abusing prescription medications. Over 50 bottles of pills were later found in her home. The breaking point came on that October afternoon when Susan had a violent argument with her new boyfriend, Renee. They had spent the day watching football and drinking, but it turned sour. In a drunken rage, Susan reportedly slapped Renee around and even tried to run his truck off the road on the drive home. Frightened, Renee called police to escort him while he collected his things from Susan's house. Deputies did come and mediated while Renee moved out. During this incident, Susan was furious. At one point, she yelled to the officer, I've been screwed by men my whole life. I've been beaten. I've been raped. Her anger at men was boiling over. After the police left and her boyfriend and estranged husband Eric had gone, Susan was alone in the house with her 4 boys. It's believed that in the hours that followed, Susan fell into a dark abyss of despair and vindictiveness. Fueled by alcohol, Xanax, and rage, she made a plan to punish the men who had hurt her in the most heartless way possible, by taking away their children. Sometime that night, Susan methodically executed her sons one by one. She used a 5-shot .38 revolver. She went to 14-year-old Brandon first, perhaps because he was from her first marriage, to John Armstrong, and she harbored resentment towards that ex as well. She shot Brandon in the temple as he lay in the living room and then once more in the neck to make sure. Then she moved to the bedroom where Austin, 7, and Brigham, 6, shared a bunk. She shot Austin near his left eye as he likely looked up at his mother in confusion. She then turned the gun on Brigham, shooting him twice near his ears. Lastly, she went to little Matthew's room. The 4-year-old was shot in the top of the head at such close range that gunpowder stippling was found on his face. The clinical forensic details are horrifying. Susan had to reload the revolver at least once during the slaughter, because a revolver holds 5 rounds, and she fired a total of 9 shots at her kids. Imagine that moment. She fires 5 bullets, then calmly pauses to eject the spent shells, refill the cylinder, and continue murdering her babies. It's chilling beyond words. After killing the boys, Susan wrote 5 suicide notes, 1 to each of the men she blamed, 1 to her ex-husband Eric, 1 to her ex-boyfriend Renee, 1 to Brandon's father John, and even notes to her sister and niece. In these notes, later read in court, her bitterness is evident. To Eric, she wrote, "You betrayed me. I've lost everyone I ever loved. Now it's time for you to do the same." She instructed him to use any money from her disability settlement to bury the kids, and ended with a spiteful reference to an old flame of his, saying, "Find your rainbow, Anna May, I'm sure." To her boyfriend Renee, she unleashed insults, telling him to go back to his exes and sneering, "See ya? Ha-ha." To Brandon's dad, she wrote that she couldn't let Brandon live without his brothers, so I did what I did. She also lamented being tired of fighting and hurt for 25 years. The notes clearly showed Susan's mindset. This was revenge. She wanted to hurt the fathers by killing the children, and then kill herself to complete the vengeful tragedy. After leaving these letters on the floor, Susan shot herself in the abdomen, apparently aiming for her heart, but misaiming due to intoxication. The bullet seriously wounded her but didn't kill her. That's when one of her relatives, alarmed by a bizarre phone message Susan had left, saying only "say goodbye," called 911, and then her estranged husband, Eric. Eric rushed to the area and was actually outside coordinating with deputies as they discovered the carnage inside. It's almost unimaginable what he felt, waiting outside a police cordon, only to hear that all his sons were dead. Susan was taken to a hospital under guard, and within days charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The community was devastated. A candlelight vigil for the boys drew hundreds of mourners. The boys were remembered as active, loving kids. Brandon the skateboarder who protected his younger brothers, Austin and Brigham the playful duo, Matthew the shy preschooler. 4 white caskets sat at their funeral, a sight so gut-wrenching it even made national news at the time. At Susan's trial in 1999, the prosecution portrayed her as a cold, selfish killer who executed her sons out of pure spite. They presented her own notes as the clearest window into motive. Susan explicitly stated she wanted the men in her life to suffer loss as she had. Witnesses also recounted how Susan often used her children as pawns during fights, at times saying things like, "If I can't have my kids, no one will." In fact, that very quote was remembered by a friend and seemed ominously prophetic. The defense did not try to claim she didn't do it. The evidence was overwhelming. Instead, they highlighted Susan's lifetime of hardship. She had allegedly been physically abused by her own father as a child, had 2 tumultuous marriages filled with abuse and infidelity, suffered depression, and was heavily intoxicated the night of the murders. Essentially, they argued she snapped under extreme emotional disturbance. They pointed out that she had attempted suicide multiple times before and that this crime was essentially a murder-suicide gone awry, perhaps hinting she thought she was sparing her kids from a world of pain, a notion some family annihilators claim. But the jury was unmoved by pity. They convicted Susan Eubanks on 4 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, multiple victims, in 1999. The death penalty was on the table, and the jurors unanimously chose it. Susan was sentenced to death, making her one of the very few women on California's death row. For years, Susan languished on death row at the Central California Women's Facility. California, however, had a moratorium on executions and hasn't executed anyone since 2006. So she sat in prison as the years ticked by. She occasionally filed appeals, all of which were denied, until recently. In 2022, under changes in California law around sentencing, and after a long appellate fight, Susan's sentence was commuted to life in prison without parole. Essentially, her lawyers argued issues about her original trial and the state's stance against capital punishment, and a judge resentenced her to life. In October 2025, it was officially confirmed that she was taken off death row and will serve life instead. This resentencing reignited anger among some of the victims' relatives and community members. For them, the death penalty was symbolic justice for the unimaginable, a mother executing 4 children. Reducing her sentence felt like a slap in the face. However, practically speaking, Susan will still die in prison. She just won't be executed by the state. As of now, Susan Eubanks, 59, remains behind bars. By most accounts, she has never shown genuine remorse. When asked once if she regretted it, an investigator recounted that she said something chilling. "No, they're better off. I saved them from this world." That twisted rationale, that she saved them by killing them, echoes the disturbing lack of responsibility she's shown. Even Parker Schenecker, from our earlier episode, noted his wife had a similar lack of remorse. It's a pattern. Some family annihilators cast themselves as victims or even martyrs in their own narratives. The Eubanks case stands as one of the deadliest instances of maternal filicide in American history. 4 young lives snuffed out in a single evening by the one person meant to protect them. The image of those boys' smiling school photos, contrasted with the knowledge of how they died, is something that weighs on anyone who hears this story. A forensic psychologist later commented that Susan's act was the ultimate act of power and control. A final, "I call the shots," aimed at hurting her exes in the deepest way possible. In the years since, much attention has been given to preventing domestic violence escalations and identifying red flags. There were red flags with Susan, threats of "no one will have the kids," severe depression, prior suicide attempts, and domestic disputes that were escalating. One can hope that improved interventions today might catch someone on that path before it turns fatal. In the memory of Brandon, Austin, Brigham, and Matthew, a local park planted 4 trees and installed a bench with their names, a place where their friends and family can sit and remember the laughter of 4 brothers now gone. The epitaph on their shared grave marker reads, "Safe in the arms of Jesus." It's a poignant attempt at comfort, that these boys who suffered such betrayal may find peace in a love greater than any on earth. This concludes another difficult episode of Crime Unknown. If you value these deep dive explorations, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Our next episode will examine a case from France, a mother whose secret crimes over nearly 2 decades shocked the world. Case 9. Dominique Cottrez, 8 newborns, one mother's secret. On a summer afternoon in July 2010, a couple doing renovations in their new house in the quiet French village of Villers-au-Tertre made a ghastly discovery. While digging in the garden, they unearthed what looked like tiny human bones. Startled, they called the authorities. Police arrived and upon further searching, found the skeletal remains of 2 newborn infants buried in shallow graves on the property. The house had previously belonged to a local nursing assistant named Dominique Cottrez, who had moved away a couple of years prior. Investigators quickly traced the gruesome find to her. What Dominique eventually revealed would stun even veteran detectives. Those 2 babies were just the tip of the iceberg. She had killed 8 of her own newborn children over a span of 17 years. The story that unfolded was one of the most horrifying cases of serial infanticide in modern history. Dominique Cottrez was a 45-year-old mother of 2 adult daughters. Outwardly, she seemed like an ordinary woman, if somewhat unremarkable. She was overweight, lived a simple life, and worked as a nurse's aide. Neighbors described her as quiet but friendly. No one had any inkling of the dark secrets she carried. When police first questioned Dominique about the 2 tiny bodies found in the yard, she shocked them by immediately confessing not only to those but to 6 more. She calmly told investigators that over the course of 1989 to 2006, she had secretly given birth 8 times, each time at home and alone, and immediately smothered the newborns moments after birth. She then either buried them or hid the bodies in plastic bags at her property. Further searches corroborated her claim. 6 additional infant corpses were found, some hidden in the garage of her former home, some buried. The local prosecutor said it was beyond anything they'd ever encountered. Why did she do this? Dominique's explanation was as strange as it was tragic. She told investigators that she had a morbid fear of having more children. She and her husband already had 2 daughters, born in the 1980s, and she insisted she did not want any more kids. Yet she never used contraception nor sought abortions. Instead, each time she found herself pregnant, apparently due to extramarital relations, as was later revealed, she carried the baby to term in complete secrecy, hiding the pregnancy by virtue of her obesity. She was a large woman, and indeed no one around her noticed she was pregnant, which strains belief, but was evidently true. Then she would deliver the baby alone, often at night or in a bathroom, and quickly suffocate the crying newborn with a towel or plastic bag. The deeper reasons Dominique gave were disturbing. She confessed that she feared these babies were the product of an incestuous relationship she had with her own father. Dominique revealed that her father had sexually abused her from childhood and well into adulthood. She claimed that even after she married, she continued a consensual sexual relationship with her father, a claim which horrified her family. She was afraid that any baby she had might actually be his, though there's no confirmation on whether that was true or if perhaps it was a delusion or excuse. Nonetheless, she stated that every time she got pregnant, she panicked that the baby could have been fathered by her own dad, and she was terrified of that shame and genetic consequence. In her mind, as twisted as it sounds, killing the newborns was a way to keep that secret buried forever. Beyond the incest fear, she also described having a phobia of doctors and any medical intervention. She never went for prenatal care, never considered legal abortion, which has been legal in France for decades, presumably because that would involve doctors and revealing her situation. She said chillingly that smothering the babies became her form of contraception, a way to prevent having more children without anyone finding out. Dominique's husband, an unassuming man named Pierre, was initially arrested too, because how could a husband not know his wife gave birth 8 times in their own home? But upon investigation, it appeared he truly had no clue. Dominique was very heavy-set, and if you can believe it, she hid each pregnancy under her weight and baggy clothes. He later said he noticed she got fatter at times, but never imagined she was pregnant, and he testified that they had virtually no sex life due to her weight and health, implying perhaps these pregnancies weren't even from him. Indeed, DNA tests on at least one of the infants confirmed it was related to Dominique, but not to her husband, bolstering her incest claim, or at least that she had other sexual partners. When this case hit the news, France was horrified and baffled. It wasn't the first multiple infanticide case. There was the infamous Courgeot case a few years earlier, with 3 babies in a freezer. But 8 was unprecedented. The fact that one person, a mother, could conceal 8 pregnancies, kill 8 newborns, and stash them around her property without anyone noticing for almost 2 decades raised serious questions. How did doctors, neighbors, or even her 2 living daughters never suspect anything? The daughters, grown by then, said they were completely unaware. Dominique had never breathed a word. Psychologists coined the term pregnancy denial or extreme secrecy, trying to understand how a woman could go through this repeatedly. Dominique herself was described as emotionally repressed, someone who bottled everything up to an extreme. The case went to trial in 2015. It was a media sensation, with global coverage referring to it as the case of France's secret serial killer mom. In court, Dominique appeared as a simple, middle-aged woman, looking downtrodden and deeply ashamed. She pled guilty and wept, saying she was sorry for what she did, but she also insisted that her actions were driven by fear, not malice. A battery of psychiatric experts evaluated her. They found she was not insane in the legal sense. She knew right from wrong, but they did diagnose her with a host of issues: depression, personality disorders, the lingering trauma from years of sexual abuse. They talked about how she had compartmentalized the pregnancies and murders, essentially living in denial of reality as a coping mechanism. French prosecutors charged her with multiple counts of first-degree murder of minors. Each normally carries life. However, in what many saw as a very lenient outcome, the court sentenced Dominique Cottrez to only 9 years in prison. The jury had been swayed by the extensive evidence of her impaired mental state and the claims of incest. They convicted her of murder, yes, but decided her judgment was altered at the times of the killings, hence meriting a lesser sentence. The prosecution had asked for 18 years, but the jury effectively halved that. The reaction across France and beyond was outrage and bewilderment. Many felt 9 years, with credit for time served, possibly less, was grossly inadequate for suffocating 8 babies who took their first and last breaths at her hands. Child advocacy groups decried the sentence, arguing it diminished the value of those 8 lives. The court explained its rationale: her psychological issues, her cooperation, she confessed without resisting, and ironically, the assessment that she was not a threat to society at large because the murders were confined to her specific fertility circumstances. But still, 8 murders, 9 years. Dominique served some time in prison. She had already been in custody a couple of years. She was released in 2018 after serving roughly 5 to 6 years of her sentence. French law often allows parole after half the term for first-time offenders. She disappeared from public view, given a changed identity. Her husband, who had stood by her initially in disbelief, divorced her. Her living daughters, who were adults by then, were left to process the revelation that their mother had secretly killed 8 of their would-be siblings, and also to process that their grandfather might have been sexually abusing their mother through their childhood. The father died in 2007, before the crimes came out, so he never faced justice or confirmation. This case, like others of neonaticide, killing of newborns, spurred much debate about prevention. How can we ensure women in such extreme situations get help? In some countries, there are safe haven laws allowing newborns to be surrendered safely, or more accessible anonymous birth options at hospitals. The question also arose: how did no one know? It turned out Dominique's obesity truly masked physical signs, and socially, she was private. It's chilling to think that not even doctors noticed, though she avoided them. Dominique Cottrez's story forces an uncomfortable empathy exercise. She was simultaneously a perpetrator of monstrous acts and a victim of incest and psychological disturbance. It doesn't excuse what she did. Nothing can. But it paints a complex picture of human behavior under extreme taboo and pressure. In one courtroom moment, Dominique said in tears, "I apologize. I regret everything, but I couldn't have done differently at the time." It's hard to reconcile that statement, yet it probably held truth in her fractured mind. In Villers-au-Tertre, a memorial plaque was placed quietly in the village cemetery for the 8 unnamed babies. The villagers struggled, and still do, with how to commemorate lives that officially never existed, lost in secret to a woman they lived alongside without knowing. This case stands as a grim extreme on the spectrum of motherhood gone wrong. Unlike others driven by anger or greed, Dominique's was driven by fear and psychological scarring, turned inward in the most destructive way. It's a tragic narrative all around. 8 infants never got a chance at life, and a woman's unhealed trauma festered into an unspeakable crime. Thank you for listening to this intense episode. For more thorough true crime stories, remember to subscribe to Crime Unknown. Our final episode in this series revisits a notorious case of a mother who not only murdered her child, but used motherhood itself as a weapon in a custody battle that inspired major legal reform. Case 10, Shirley Turner, a deadly custody battle, the Dear Zachary case. On November 5, 2001, in the parking lot of a state park in Pennsylvania, 28-year-old Dr. Andrew Bagby was found shot to death, 5 bullet wounds in total. He was a beloved young physician, and his murder shook his community. Suspicion quickly fell on his ex-girlfriend, 40-year-old Dr. Shirley Jane Turner. Shirley was a Canadian doctor whom Andrew had dated while he studied medicine in Newfoundland. Their relationship was stormy. Andrew had broken it off, and Shirley did not take it well. In fact, just the day before his death, she had driven 16 hours from Iowa, where she was then working, to Pennsylvania to meet with Andrew one last time. That rendezvous ended with Andrew's murder. The evidence was damning. Shirley's phone records placed her en route to Pennsylvania. The bullets matched a gun she owned, and she had left a threatening voicemail to Andrew. By the time U.S. authorities issued an arrest warrant, Shirley Turner had fled to Canada, her home country. It seemed like a straightforward, if tragic, case of a jilted lover committing murder. But what unfolded next made this case far more twisted and heartbreaking. As U.S. prosecutors worked to extradite Shirley, she revealed a shocking surprise. She was pregnant with Andrew's child. In July 2002, Shirley gave birth in St. John's, Newfoundland, to a baby boy she named Zachary Turner. For Andrew's devastated parents, David and Kate Bagby, baby Zachary was a beacon of hope amid tragedy. He was their grandson, a living piece of Andrew. They immediately flew to Newfoundland, determined to be in their grandchild's life and to fight for custody, especially since the baby's mother was the prime suspect in their son's murder. What ensued was an infuriating legal saga. Shirley Turner was arrested in Canada on the U.S. warrant, but since Canada didn't have a speedy extradition, and she was a Canadian citizen, she managed to get released on bail pending the extradition hearings. To the Bagby's horror, the Canadian judge allowed Shirley to walk free as long as she surrendered her passport and attended counseling, and she retained custody of baby Zachary in the meantime. The logic was that she had not been convicted of anything yet, so presumption of innocence, etc. For over a year, while legal wrangling continued, the Bagbys were forced into an agonizing arrangement. To see their grandson, they had to play nice with Shirley, the woman they believed, with good reason, had murdered their only son. They moved temporarily to Newfoundland from California, swallowed their rage, and pretended to be cordial. They documented everything, hoping the courts would see that Shirley was unstable. Indeed, evidence of Shirley's mental health issues and violent history mounted. She had stalked Andrew obsessively before his death, and even had a past incident of misconduct with a different ex-boyfriend. But still, she was out on bail with Zachary, as if nothing were wrong. The Bagbys did get supervised visits with Zachary. They grew to love the cherubic little boy, but every time they handed him back to Shirley, it tore at them. They tried through court motions to get custody, warning that Shirley was dangerous. But Newfoundland family law at the time gave great deference to biological parents unless they were proven unfit. Since Shirley hadn't yet been convicted of murder and mental health evaluations didn't declare her incompetent, their hands were tied. The Bagbys lived a nightmare. Not only did they lose their son, but they had to worry every minute that Shirley might harm Zachary out of spite or delusion. In late July 2003, after protracted hearings, a Canadian court finally ordered Shirley Turner to be extradited to the U.S. to face charges for Andrew's murder. Shirley, upon hearing this, made a show of being stoic, but inside, she apparently hatched a final act of control. On August 18, 2003, Shirley Turner took 13-month-old Zachary, drove to the edge of a wharf in Conception Bay, South Newfoundland, and in the early hours of the morning, she jumped into the Atlantic Ocean, holding baby Zachary tightly to her chest, both drowned, a murder-suicide. Shirley had given herself ultimate revenge. If she couldn't keep Zachary, no one would. The news of Zachary's death broke hearts across both countries. The Bagbys' worst fears had come true despite all their warnings. The case became a media firestorm in Canada. How on earth could a woman charged with first-degree murder, of the baby's father no less, be out on bail and allowed to kill an innocent child. There was public outcry over the failings of the justice and bail system. This eventually led to tangible change. In 2010, largely due to the Bagby's relentless campaigning, Canada passed Bill C-464, known as Zachary's Bill. This law amended Canada's criminal code to tighten bail requirements in cases involving serious charges and potential risks to children. Essentially, it reminded judges to consider the safety of children when granting bail to an accused. The story was also immortalized in the powerful documentary Dear Zachary, A Letter to a Son About His Father, 2008, by Kurt Quenner. Kurt was Andrew's close friend, who initially set out to make a film to honor Andrew for baby Zachary to watch when he grew up. After Zachary's murder, the film turned into an indictment of the system and a tribute to both Andrew and Zachary. The documentary is gut-wrenching and brought this case to international attention. No one can finish it dry-eyed, especially at the moment the viewer learns of Zachary's fate. What makes the case of Shirley Turner so especially heinous is that she used motherhood as both shield and weapon. She utilized her pregnancy to delay extradition. Some speculate she got pregnant intentionally after killing Andrew to leverage sympathy and legal advantage, though we can't know for sure. Once Zachary was born, she wielded him as a pawn, knowing the Bagbys would tread carefully to not anger her. And ultimately, in a final act of selfishness and malice, she killed her child as the ultimate, "If I can't have him, no one will" statement. Shirley's actions obliterated 2 generations of the Bagby family. Kate and David Bagby lost their only son and their only grandchild within 2 years. Their strength and grace in the aftermath has been awe-inspiring. They channeled their grief into fighting for legal reform, and they wrote a book, Dance with the Devil, about the ordeal. They continued to advocate for victims' rights and child protection. The legacy of this tragedy is a cautionary tale for courts worldwide. Child safety must trump parental rights when red flags are so glaring. It's also a stark reminder of how blind spots in the legal system can be exploited by malignant individuals. If any good came from it, it's that Canadian bail laws did tighten, but at a cost that is beyond measure. For the conclusion of our series, reflecting on all these cases of evil mothers, we see a spectrum of motives and mentalities. Some were driven by greed, Klara Matthews, Louise Porton. Some by spite, Susan Eubanks, Shirley Turner. Some by mental illness, Julie Schenecker, Brittany Pilkington. And others by warped beliefs or desperation, Veronica Panarello, Dominique Cottrez, Klara Mauerova's complicity. What they all share is a profound breach of the most fundamental trust, that between a child and mother. Each story is a chilling illustration that evil can wear the face of a caregiver, that danger can come from those we instinctively trust the most. Yet amid the darkness of these tales, we also saw glimmers of hope, communities that rallied, laws that changed, and memories that outshine the cruelty that tried to destroy them. Eli Hart, Shannon Matthews, Calix and Bo Schenecker, Niall, Gavin and Noah Pilkington, Loris Stivell, Lexi and Scarlett Porton, Andre and Jacob Mauerovi, Brandon, Austin, Brigham and Matthew Eubanks, 8 unnamed Cottrez babies, Andrew and Zachary. We remember these victims not just for how they died, but for who they were and could have been. In telling their stories, we honor them. Thank you for joining us through this difficult journey. If you found these explorations meaningful, please subscribe to Crime Unknown and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive. And as we close, we pose a question to you, our audience. Which of these cases affected you the most? And what do you think society can do to prevent such tragedies in the future? Let us know in the comments below. Stay safe and take care of one another.